With Blue Lock Season 3 being finally announced, and due to the fact that it is going to cover the biggest, the grandiest, and the most hyped arc of them all, I feel like the question that should be on everyone's mind is actually how are they going to go about it? How would the anime studio actually tackle Blue Lock's biggest arc? And so that's what we are going to do in today's video, where we are going to speculate on what each episode of this season would actually cover. Well, first we gotta figure out how many episodes fit with this season, but more importantly I will go over each episode and what chapters should it cover for it to be a perfect pacing. And so without any further ado, let's jump in. Now, for how many episodes should this season have, it's actually quite interesting. You see, the Neo-Egoist League spans over 17 volumes, from volume 18 to volume 34, which for those of you who notice, it is actually the same length of Blue Lock before this arc, meaning that the NEL span the same as Blue Lock's first selection, second, third, and even the U20 game in its entirety, which in turn puts Season 3 at the same length of 2 seasons, Season 1 with 24 episodes and Season 2 with 14. And honestly, if they wanna go the best route here, they should give us a thick, juicy season with 37 to 38 episodes. Now I am leaning towards 37 because a lot of anime back in the day actually spanned 37 episodes. However, judging by the fact that Season 1 and 2 together amount to about 38 episodes, I feel like Season 3 should be no different. It should span 38 episodes. And I know by today's standards that sounds absurd. Usually modern anime span from 12 to 13 or 24 to 25 episodes. And usually the exception to that are shows like One Piece or Boruto that are actually long-standing anime. However, as I said, back in the day, a lot of anime span 37 episodes, with Death Note being the biggest example. However, that's not the only case. Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 span over 22 episodes, which I know seems not that far from 24, however the point stands that they did not really follow the rule of 12 to 13 or 24 to 25. And so I really feel like Blue Lock Season 3 should not follow this rule either, and they should give us a thick 37 to 38 episode season. Now obviously there is always the argument of actually splitting the season into part 1 and part 2. However, that honestly would be so messy and it wouldn't really work, because the way the games of the NEL are structured is not actually that easy to cut in between. You see, if they wanna do anything and split the season, they would give us part 1 consisting of 23 episodes covering the first 3 games, and then 15 episodes for the PXG and Nagi's game. And honestly, this would be the biggest mistake they would do, because it would completely kill off the hype of the Neo-Egoist League. And that's actually for 3 reasons. The first of which is, as I said in my previous video, the whole Neo-Egoist League is an overarching story of Isegi's ascension to the #1 spot in Blue Lock. And so splitting it at any moment would not really feel right, especially because the likes of Nagi, Baro or Rin are not the main antagonists. Kaiser versus Isegi is the main focus of this season, and so it should be one naturally flowing story and not really split into parts. Then, and speaking of Kaiser, the Uber's game actually ends with him being at the bottom, having been completely defeated by Isegi and getting blown off completely by Lorenzo. However, it is in the PXG game that we really get to see Kaiser's true level and he shows us his real face. And so if they actually split it right before the PXG game, they would actually kill off Kaiser's momentum completely. The guy would lose all hype going into the final game. And finally, and I feel like this one kinda goes back to the first point, even if we cut the games, the chapters that are between games are actually so interconnected that I don't feel there would be a clean cut. Something would always feel wrong no matter how you cut it. And so I really hope that the studio doesn't go this stupid route, and they actually stick the landing, give us a great production, and of course give us a thick, juicy season of 37 to 38 episodes. However, let's actually now shift gears and talk about what each episode would actually cover, going from episode 1 to episode 37 or 38. Now, as I said, the Neo-Egoist League officially starts with volume 18, which for those who don't know, each volume of Blue Lock, or maybe most anime, has 9 chapters in them. And so for episode 1, it should start with the volume, and then it should cover 5 chapters, from chapter 150 to 154. And the reason for that is, I feel like these chapters are so slow, they don't really cover much except a goofy episode and then things from Ren and Isagi's perspective. And the real thing doesn't start until chapter 153. However, I don't feel that it would be a clean cut here. I feel like the episode should include the following chapter as well, which in turn would actually give us the perfect ending, with Isagi actually witnessing Noah emerges from the ground. Isagi finally meets his idol, and I feel like that's the biggest cliffhanger to this season. That's the biggest promise we could get from episode 1. It ending with the reveal of Noah would be just perfect. And honestly, it would immediately set the season ablaze, and it would give us something to wait for in the next episode. And by the way, I know you guys read the manga, but just imagine it if you didn't read the manga. Just seeing Noah emerge out of nowhere would really blow everyone's mind. However, for episode 2, I feel like it is fitting for it to cover the 4 remaining chapters of volume 18. And because Kunigami actually shows up and he is great, I feel like we also need to include the chapter where he gets eliminated by Shido, and then the whole thing with him seeing the wild card training and whatnot. I feel like that would be perfect. And honestly, this might be my favorite episode of this season, simply because it contains my favorite chapter, 158. As you all know, Noah's speech about success really changed my life, and it is the reason why I love Blue Lock this much. That conversation with Isagi is so deep on so many levels that I feel like they really need to do it justice. And actually, the first move into making it the legendary moment that it is would actually be giving Noah a worthy voice actor. I feel like due to his mentality, there is only one voice actor that fits with him, which is none other than the legend Kanjiro Tsuda, which for those who don't know, he is the voice actor behind Nanami in Jujutsu Kaisen, Seto Kaiba in Yu-Gi-Oh!, and of course Overhaul in My Hero Academia. And honestly, at first I was thinking of the Kyuubi or Kaido's voice actor. However, due to Noah's laid-back mentality and his seriousness, I feel like he gives off Nanami's vibes, and so his voice actor would fit perfectly, especially because Sukuna's voice actor is taken by Baro. And I'm just begging the studio, please hire Kanjiro Tsuda for this one. However, enough babbling about Noah, let's actually talk about how the episode would end. And I feel like it ending with the face-off against Bachira and Otoya and their team FC Barsha would be perfect. A perfect ending to the second episode. Then for episode 3, obviously it will pick up immediately from chapter 159. And here I think it should cover about 4 chapters, ending with chapter 62. Now, to be honest, I've gone back and forth between it actually covering 3 chapters or 4. However, I ended up settling with 4 because of the next episode. However, let's not jump the gun just yet, because this is still perfect for this episode, as it will start with Kunigami's attack, then it will move to Bachira counterattack and him scoring, and finally it ends with Kaiser's execution, with him delivering the best shot we've seen. And I feel like Noah hyping up Kaiser would be the perfect ending to the perfect episode. However, the reason I said it needs to cover 4 chapters because the next episode should only cover 3, which are chapters 63, 64 and 65. And the reason for that is episode 4 should be all about the pros, nothing but the clash between Noah and Lavinio. You see, it will start with Levi getting excited and then joining the game, and ends with Noah completely crushing him and scoring his legendary goal. And honestly, if they give us a great production here, this episode would shake the world, because the pros are finally playing against one another. However, moving on to episode 5, we are going to go back to covering 4 chapters, from 166 to 169. And the reason I find this perfect is because after Kunigami scores the goal, Ego would start talking about the salaries, and he doesn't finish talking about them until episode 169. And so I find it just perfect for the pacing, especially because we are going to get to see Rin versus Ubers, and him scoring the final goal in that game. And finally, the episode then ends with the introduction of the second team against Bastard Munich, Menshine City. And actually, this is specifically why this chapter should be included in the 5th episode and not be left for the 6th. You see, because going forward for the 6th episode, we are going to shift the focus to the Manshine City game, specifically their training with Prince, and then the dilemma between Isagi and Yuki. And so I feel like the whole thing with Rin against Ubers and the salaries, they honestly don't fit that well into the narrative of this episode. And so episode 6 will once more cover 4 chapters, from 170 to 173. And again, the reason why this fits because it will be the perfect episode to introduce Manshine. We will get to see Prince, his philosophy, then we get to see the biggest dilemma that will happen in that game between Yuki and Isagi, and of course it ends with a legendary moment of Chigiri challenging Kunigami and the kickoff of the Manshine City game. For episode 7, we are actually going to cover 3 chapters instead of 4. And honestly, the reason for that is it's going to be a perfect cut that way, and not necessarily because of the pacing of the episode, which for those who don't know is going to be all about Chigiri scoring his 44 Golden Zone goal. However, I feel like we could do something here. Because the episode will only cover 3 chapters, we could actually borrow some scenes from the chapters covered by the previous episode, specifically about Prince talking to Chigiri, and I feel like with that it would honestly be enough. And of course, as I said, the episode will end with Chigiri scoring his perfect goal. Episode 8, however, will shift focus from Chigiri into Isagi, and it will be all about Isagi getting depressed due to the difference between him and Kaiser, and it will end with him actually acknowledging Kaiser and deciding to watch him in order to reach the next level. And honestly, 4 chapters are enough because it captures everything perfectly, from how Chigiri succeeds to how Nagi and Isagi are failing to the latter actually deciding to follow Kaiser, and it ending with him saying I need to watch him is everything I need for this episode. Episode 9, however, should be labeled one word: Meta Vision, because it will cover the 4 chapters that introduce this honestly broken vision, from Kaiser completely destroying Manshine in chapter 181 to a cliffhanger of Isagi and Kurona destroying Manshine at the end of chapter 184, covering only 4 chapters. And I know what you might say, the end of the volume is just 1 chapter away, and so why not include it? However, I feel like to build hype, it would be perfect to have Isagi almost scoring, and then in the next episode we see Kaiser and Kunigami stealing his goal. And in order to explain why that would be perfect, we need to move to episode 10, which much like the previous would cover 4 chapters as well, from 185 to 188. And the name of the game for this one is actually to establish Isagi and Kaiser's metavision and how they are equal to each other, meaning in order to score, Isagi needs to account for Kaiser. However, the episode will also cover Nagi and Ryo's reunion, and the reason I say it will be perfect because it will end with this insane cliffhanger, with half Nagi, half Ryo's skull threatening Isagi, and also the skull being at the center with Isagi preparing himself with metavision would honestly just be the perfect cliffhanger to Nagi's goal. Speaking of which, episode 11 will be all about that, covering 4 chapters as well, from 189 to 192. However, this episode would have 2 tones. The first is of course Nagi destroying Bastard, Isagi and Kaiser and scoring his ultimate goal. And then after that, the episode shifts gears into Prince and Noah, and ends with a kickoff after the Masters have joined. And honestly, we can't go any further because things immediately get crazy. As soon as Prince and Noah join, shit really starts to happen. And also in this episode, we will start to get a little bit from Yuki's perspective, who by the way was completely absent until this point. However, don't count him out just yet because he is going to do amazing in the next few episodes. Speaking of which, moving on to episode 12, which instead of 4, I think 5 chapters would be fitting. Now, it is going to be a packed episode, but given that it is insane action, I feel like they could really squeeze it. And honestly, we can't really spare any other episode because the next one is the 7th and the game should end there. In any case, however, this episode would cover everything about Prince, him trying to score and Isagi stopping him, and then Yuki destroying Manshine only to lose to Prince. However, and as I said, instead of it ending on the cliffhanger of Isagi threatening Yuki, I feel like the episode ending with Isagi clutching his hand and teeth and yelling egocentrism would be just perfect. Him finding the next piece in order to destroy everyone. And destroying everyone is what he will do in episode 13. And by the way, this episode as well would cover 5 chapters, from 198 to 202. And as I said, it would honestly be an Isagi show. Not only did he completely destroy both Ryo and Nagi, but with the help of Noah and Kuruna, he wipes the floor with everyone on Manshine, and then even wipes the floor with Kaiser and Yuki to finally pull Yuki from the Rebel and make him score a goal. Now I know this episode would not actually cover the celebration, but I feel like it fits. It fits that the episode ends with an insane goal, much like we've seen it happen with Nagi's goal in season 2. And so it ending with Yuki screaming after scoring his insane goal, I feel like it is just fitting. However, there is another reason why I did not want to include the celebration of this goal into this episode. It's the aftermath of what Isagi just did. Him and Yuki learning to respect each other, Kaiser's challenge, and Isagi passing out. Then the episode carries out to him waking up and hearing about what Baro did, only for the episode to shift gears at the end and talk about Yuki's blindness and of course introduce Isagi's biggest ally, Yo Hiyori. And I feel like the episode ending with Isagi inviting Hiyori to play would be just perfect. It is actually a nod to the third selection, but also I feel like Isagi is starting to see that he needs other players in order to succeed. Sure, he is the star of the show, but the show needs a strong cast. And so episode 14 will cover 4 chapters, from 203 to 206. Then episode 15, which I think would be fitting to be called Duality, would start from chapter 207 and covers 4 chapters, ending with 208. Now, I know what you might say. It actually ends after the third game. The Uber's game has already begun. And so how does that fit? Well, even though having the introduction of Ubers as the cliffhanger for the episode would be great, I feel like it's not going to be as good as actually having the Don Lorenzo as the cliffhanger. And so for that reason specifically, I decided to end the episode on chapter 2010. Just imagine with me, Kaiser is about to destroy Ubers, Nico can't hold him off, and then all of a sudden we see a purple aura and Lorenzo snatch the ball, with the episode ending with a close-up on his face as he says, I honestly feel it would be the perfect cliffhanger for this game. It just introduces the Don Lorenzo in the best way possible and use him as the cliffhanger for the upcoming 7 episodes covering the Uber's game. From there, episode 16 would break the mold again and only cover 3 chapters, from 211 to 213. And honestly, the reason for that, I feel like we need to give Isagi's goal its moment, especially with the flashback and whatnot. And by the way, we could have a lot of anime exclusive scenes here, because they could honestly extend the flashback a little bit. And then the whole thing of what Ubers does to stop Isagi should be left for the next episode. Speaking of which, episode 17 would pick up immediately from chapter 214, introducing Uber's tactics of stopping Isagi that rely on Nico, and then ending with Nico stopping Isagi once more in chapter 217, covering 4 chapters of perfect pacing, including both Baro's goal and then Lorenzo destroying Kaiser once more. However, and speaking of Kaiser, episode 18 should be all about him destroying Ubers, as it will cover 4 chapters from 218 to 221. And as I said, Kaiser's honestly insane goal would be the main center of this episode. However, it will also include Kunigame's rush, Isagi destroying Nico, Lorenzo destroying both Isagi and Yuki, and then after the insane goal, it should end with both Noah and Snuffy joining the game. The perfect ending to one of the best episodes in this season. However, the hype train doesn't stop, even though Kaiser was insane here. The next episodes are going to be all about Snuffy and just how insane of a player he is. And for that reason, I feel like episode 19 should cover 5 chapters instead of 4, from 222 to 226. And honestly, the only reason I am including 5 chapters is that the episode needs to end on the biggest cliffhanger in the game, which is Baro actually rebelling against Snuffy. Sure, the episode would be Snuffy centered, however, doing a great twist of Baro actually betraying him would be just perfect to end the episode with. Because honestly, much like Noah commented, it would be just ironic for Snuffy. However, and of course, episode 20 will carry on with Baro's rebellion covering 4 chapters, from 227 to 230. Now, I know the goal will be scored at the middle of the episode. However, remember Shido's second goal in the second season. It was scored at the beginning of the episode and then the remaining was about Baro. And so I feel like it would be just perfect here as well. It would start with Baru completely destroying Kaiser and Isagi, and then shift gears to end with Hiyori joining the game. And I feel like there isn't a better ending sequence than Noah actually threatening the duo that they would lose their spots if they fail to score the next goal. Because honestly, that stipulation in of itself is actually a great cliffhanger. And of course, it sets the stage perfectly for the next episode, which of course is 21, and it will cover 4 chapters as usual, from 231 to 234. Now, this episode will be all about Hiyori gaining the confidence to play on this high level, and it will end perfectly with Isagi finally beating Lorenzo with the help of Hiyori, only for him to fail due to Kaiser and Baru. And so Hiyori and Isagi clenching their teeth and saying that they still need a piece would be just the perfect ending to this episode. And much like the previous one, it would set up the next one perfectly. And so episode 22, being the 7th and last in this game, would cover 4 chapters and be the conclusion to Bastard Munich vs Ubers. Now honestly, this episode would cover a lot, from Isagi discovering the no connection piece to him actually implying it with Hiyori and then him scoring his amazing goal. This episode would have it all. And as I said, it would end with Isagi and Hiyori having their brotherly moment and hugging each other. From there, episode 23 will deal in the aftermath of this game. It would of course covers the celebration, Lorenzo's recognition of Isagi and Hiyori, Isagi talking to Igaguri, and of course the main part of the episode would be Ness and Kaiser's backstory. I feel like we can't really split the backstory and say the episode ends with chapter 242, but at the same time, for the episode to only cover 3 chapters, that would be too low, especially because nothing really happens. It's not really like these chapters are packed with important things, they are basically just celebration and Isagi dreaming of the #1 spot. And so I feel like the second half of episode 23 will be all about Kaiser and Ness's backstory, meaning that this episode would cover 5 chapters from 239 to 243. Moving forward, however, episode 24 will deal in the other games that are happening in the Neo Egoist League. It would of course cover 4 chapters from 244 to 247, and it would start of course with Rin and Shido completely destroying FC Barca. Then it moves to Ubers completely violating Manshine, and finally ending with the preparation against PXG, and of course the biggest cliffhanger would be Ego's speech, right before the start of the biggest game in the entirety of the show. And as you all know, the PXG game is my favorite hands down. There is just not a singular game that reaches this level, especially with the whole thing of the talented learners against the geniuses. And so, and without any further ado, episode 25 will get us right into action with the kickoff of the PXG game. And here the episode once more will cover 4 chapters from 248 to 251. And as you may have noticed, it is right before Shido scores his insane goal. However, I feel like the cliffhanger of Hiyori shit-talking to Rin would be just big enough for us to get hyped into this game. And I feel like if we include Shido scoring here, it honestly would skew the balance. And I feel like we need balance in order to tell the story of how these 2 teams are actually evenly matched. And so it ending with chapter 251 is just perfect. From there, and picking up the heat straight, episode 26 will begin with Shido's thundering goal in chapter 252. Then of course it will cover 4 chapters and end with Isagi talking to Kinigami. It will be top performance meeting top performance meeting top performance at the end of chapter 255. And honestly, this episode will be really cool, especially because Kunigami will be the star of this episode, which is honestly the first time ever since his comeback. It will be really cool for us, the watchers, to see Chaz and Shido trying times and times again, only for Kunigami to completely destroy them and stop them every time. And then it ending with Isagi, Hiyori and Kunigami meeting at the point of their top performance. It just would be perfect. However, episode 27, it will be all about Isagi ascending to the motherfucker tier, where first of course Hiyori will destroy Charles. Then he goes on to destroy Karasu, Zantetsu and Nanase. From there, Kunigami crushes Shido, and of course Isagi then crushes both Kaiser and Ren. And in fact, this episode will be so hype, I feel like it should only cover 3 chapters, which will be all about Isagi's goal and him actually realizing that he just beat the #1 spot in Blue Rock. And so he has just taken the first step into becoming the best in the world. But little does he know, both Kaiser and Ren are about to awaken. And the first to rebel, of course, is Kaiser, and so episode 28 is going to be all about his rise and him reaching the 0 point. And honestly, this is one of the best moments in Blue Lock for me. Just seeing Kaiser going from that idiot character to a guy who is worthy of his level and his new Gen 11 status is honestly just so satisfying. And actually it speaks volumes to how Blue Lock treats success. You cannot be successful while being arrogant and satisfied of your current level. And that's the name of the game for this episode, which will cover 4 chapters. From 259, where Kaiser fails to score with his new move, then his backstory, and it ends with him shedding everything in chapter 262. And honestly, there isn't a bigger cliffhanger than Kaiser here clenching his teeth and coming for Isagi. He is going to destroy him by returning to his original level, by embracing the possibilities after getting to the 0 point. However, and because he will be so dominant after this, episode 29 will carry on talking about Kaiser's rise until of course he scores his superstar goal. Now of course it will cover 4 chapters from 263 to 266, going through the motion of Charles destroying Isagi and of course Kiora helping Kaiser to score his wonderful goal. And honestly, just the episode ending with Kaiser's scream, that would be just perfect and it would set the anime industry on fire, because honestly that shit right there is the best Blue Lock can offer. It is what I love about this show specifically. However, after Kaiser have his moment and after he scores his amazing goal, next in line is of course Ren. And here the episode would actually start with Kaiser's challenge to Isagi and him of course letting go of Ness. However, it will shift gears very swiftly towards Ren, his descent into madness because everyone who mattered actually scored except for him, and then him of course destroying Kuruna and going on the offense only to be challenged by Isagi. Meaning again the episode would cover 4 chapters. From 267 to 270, where honestly we will have another perfect ending, where the episode ending with Isagi tackling Rin, however he is much weaker to do anything except shaking Rin's balance a little bit. However, in that moment I feel like we could have a perfect scene, where after Isagi's tackle the screen goes black and we hear Rin say this: "Oh, my ego." Damn man, now that would be the perfect ending and the perfect cliffhanger to what's about to happen and to what Rin is about to do. From there, the 31st episode would actually cover just that, how Rin completely destroyed Bastard Munich. And here I honestly mean it, because there isn't a more dominant goal than Rin's goal here. However, due to how things are moving quickly in this section, I feel this episode covering 5 chapters would fit more than just 4. And also this is so we can have it ending with the end of the volume and ending with Rin's crash shot. However, and once more, I have another banger ending for this episode. You see, after his crash with Isagi and after his scores, we don't get any celebration, we don't get any aftermath. Simply the screen will zoom onto Rin and once more everything goes black and we hear him say, "This is fucking incredible." Now again, that would be a perfect ending. And honestly, as you can tell, I am very excited for Kaiser and Rin's goals, because they are some of the most dominant goals in all of Blue Lock. Now obviously for Rin, even though I love the goal, I still hate his character and the way he is going into madness. However, that's specifically what Loki likes about him. But in order for us to talk about that, we move to episode 32, which will cover 4 chapters once more, from 276 to 279. And if the name of the game for the past few episodes are Kaiser and Rin, the name of the game for this one is going to be Loki. From him being impressed by Rin in chapter 276 to him then completely destroying the Kaiser impact in chapter 279. And of course we will have the seeds for the next episode, with Noah completely betraying Isagi. However, moving on to episode 33, which will cover about 4 chapters as well, the name of the game is no longer Loki and instead is Isagi and his reaction to geniuses. It will start from 280 with Isagi realizing that he can't do anything against geniuses, and of course him then crying. From there, Ego takes the stage and talk about the formula for evolution. Then Isagi finally sees the light at the end of the tunnel, with Kaiser actually showing that he too is a talented learner. Meaning, if Noah is valuing Kaiser so much, then the reason he betrayed Isagi is not because he's not a genius, but rather it's all due to the mentality. And then, of course, the episode ends with chapter 238, with Rin being completely stalked by Isagi, Kaiser and Gagamaru, proving that talented learners actually have a way of dealing with geniuses, especially if they work together. And I mean, come on, what better pacing than this? Like the episode ending with Gagamaru, Isagi and Kaiser being happy that they finally stopped the unstoppable Ren. But believe me when I say things get only crazier with episode 34, which sure it will cover 4 chapters once more, but this time it will start with Isagi shit talking to Loki and Noah, immediately hooking the fans into what's about to happen. From there, of course, Isagi and Kaiser make their pact and they stop Ren. However, then the duo is stopped by yet another talented learner duo, which is of course Charles and Karasu, who just unlocked his metavision. However, I wouldn't end the episode here, because the final chapter should be 287, where Noah once more, being the emotionless asshole that he is, completely betrays Igagori, and he destroys his career in an instant so they can achieve the win. And by the way, Blue Lock right here is going to be on fire. This shit honestly is better than the U20 game and all the hype it entailed, and so I feel like it is mandatory for them to actually give us a good production, especially in the hype moments of Rin and Shido versus Kaiser and Isagi. And of course the studio is well known for the slow moments, and so Igagori crying with Isagi's hand over his head would be just perfect to end the episode. However, moving on to episode 35, it will start with Yuki's sub in chapter 288. Then it will cover of course 4 chapters, ending with Nessa's dilemma at the end of chapter 291. And honestly, I feel like it's just going to be perfect. Everything about this episode will scream just one thing, which is hype and nothing but pure hype. And for it to end with Ness actually feeling depressed and him trying to catch up to Kaiser, it's just the perfect transition into the next episode, which will actually be the finale of this game, where instead of covering 4 chapters, episode 36 will only cover 3. And that's because it will have the final and most important goal in all of the Neo Egoist League. And of course, the reason I included chapter 294 is because we need to see the aftermath between Isagi and Kaiser. And so I feel like 3 chapters is just perfect for how big this episode will be. And also, with this episode actually covering only 3 chapters, it would be just perfect for the last 2 to cover 4 each. Starting with episode 37, which will be all about the game between Nagi and Bachiro. And I feel like covering 4 chapters and finishing with chapter 298 and giving us the ending of Nagi being actually eliminated would be just perfect. And I feel like with just how much happens in that episode, 4 chapters is just enough. And then episode 38 would start strong and be the perfect ending to the perfect season. Of course, it would start with Ego talking about satisfaction and how it killed Nagi, then moving to Ness, who finally became a badass and who is now trying to change Kaiser, which means for the first time he is the more dominant player in their friendship. And then of course the episode would give us the bus scene, which honestly at this point is just iconic. However, instead of covering chapter 302, which is all about Nagi sinking into depression, I feel like the studio should skip this chapter specifically and end the final episode for the season with chapter 303, with the big announcement of the U20 World Cups, how Loki and all the New Gen 11 are participating, and of course Isagi's speech to Japan. Much like season 2 ended with him promising a U20 World Cups, Isagi, now having been risen to the #1 spot, would actually confirm his promise of giving Japan a U20 World Cup win. And honestly, there isn't a perfect ending than this. Ego and Boratsuta's promise, Isagi's speech, and the big reveal of the U20 World Cups that will of course happen in season 4. However, we can throw a little bit of a cliffhanger, because chapter 303 ends with Nagi playing his game and the screen tells him to choose between continuing or actually giving up. And honestly, much like we had Kunigami at the end of season 2, it would be perfect to have Nagi at the end of season 3. Everything coming full circle. However, that's all I've got for you today, guys. Please let me know what do you think about my pacing, and if I am actually onto something here. And if not, please let me know what do you think would be the perfect pacing for this season, how would they structure it, and if they should split it into different parts. However, with that, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, thank you for watching.